Welcome, everyone, and happy Boise Entrepreneur Week. My name is Tiam Rastegar. I'm the executive director at Trailhead. Also happen to be the co-chair at Boise Entrepreneur Week. I'm here joined today by fellow co-chair Nick Krabs from Vinyl. Got Jeff Reynolds here from Reynolds and Myers. And last but not least, Don Day from Boise Dev. And we are just going to have a roundtable discussion around the topic of why Boise. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really interesting conversation. I mean, Boise has been on a growth trajectory really since the 80s, which before we started, we were talking about that. Really forever is the truth of that. And maybe it's just like the feeling is very acute right now, kind of as we look pre-pandemic and then going into the pandemic with all the movement that's gone on with people coming from coastal cities to Boise. And I thought this roundtable discussion would be really interesting because why do we think that's happening? Like what's in the makeup of this town, or maybe the macroeconomic factors that are causing to have so much growth here, and maybe even some of the success that we're seeing in some of the big exits. And so I'm really excited, and thanks Tiam for the intro to have this conversation about what's going on here. And so maybe Don, it would make sense to start with you. And like, I know you covered a lot with Boise Dev on kind of the development. I mean, that's certainly where you started.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I started at Trailhead North, sitting next to this guy in 2016, and was going to do some, digital marketing stuff like Jeff, but I'm not as good as Jeff. So I was like,
just pretty good at that stuff.
Work. Yeah. So we started this Boise Dev thing, and growth was not a major factor. It was really just like, what's that building? I'm driving by, see some construction. Can you tell me what that is? That's not what it is today. It is all about growth from, those new projects to the growth of companies. Talked to Cradlepoint today to, we're having serious challenges with our housing. And it's encompassed us all. You're seeing it in fights at city council meetings. You're seeing it in people being upset. You're seeing it in the demographic changes that we're starting to see in Idaho. And, you ask why Boise, it's why not Boise? You have this beautiful river that runs through and that amazing Boise front and things to do. And it's an attractive place to be. I lived in California for a year, and Jeff and I have talked about this. If it weren't for the really terrible winters and the 100-degree temperatures we get in the summer, nobody would live in California anymore. They would all live here.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
it's
be grateful.
It's the truth of the matter, right? And so I think there's a lot to it.
And some of the stuff is in a way a long time coming. Last year during Boise Startup Week, now Entrepreneur Week, of course, the CCDC gave us a video talking about kind of the history and decisions that played into downtown being built. And, as someone who's lived here basically their whole life, I didn't know that history. I didn't know about the studies that were going on in the 80s. And that was a project that didn't really sunset. I mean, you probably know better than I. When did they actually sunset?
2018,
2018, yeah. Right? So they actually sunsetted downtown as a CCDC district in 2018. And so all that investment, over the course of 20 years or something like
30,
that? Yeah. I mean, it took a long time.
And 20 years before that, where they blew it all up and tore it down.
Well, is demolishing investment still too? I mean, debate, right?
Well, I'll say when I first came here 25 years ago for the first time, and all the things that Don just mentioned were the same things that brought me here 25 years ago. And it was sleepier. Downtown wasn't quite what it is. The Grove.
It's sleepier again, but
well, 8th Street doesn't feel like it. Right. But I wonder how much of this is a mega trend issue. Like, I get that Boise has done a lot of groundwork, and a ton of credit goes to the established, the people who are laying the groundwork for where we're at today. But there's also just a mega trend. Small cities everywhere are booming, and if you look at us, we were like the only small city with our catcher's mitt sort of ready to.
Right.
To receive this. Spokane was sort of messy, and other cities, Bend doesn't have the infrastructure, all these different things, didn't have downtown density. So I'm wondering how much is the combo of what Don says, why not Boise, and just the spectacularness of Boise mixed with mega trends.
Well, and even you look at the last 18 months, why Billings? Why
Yeah, right.
Reno?
Bozeman.
Why Austin? Why Bozeman? Why Spokane, Tri-City? Because people used to have to live where they work.
Exactly.
They don't anymore. So that's why I think the short term, I think you hit on it really
How
well.
do you think that trend affects us in the long run? So this is a question that I've had a lot. Is Boise, no doubt, has benefited from, I'm going to say coastal markets generally, but people who, during the pandemic were working remotely could move to a place like Bozeman, like Boise, like a number of other tertiary markets. But, we're starting to see this desire to kind of boomerang them back to the office. And, do you think that affects Boise in the long term, or do you think the ship has sailed?
Both. I think we don't know. So, I'm a news guy, right? Like, I like the facts. I like to know what's happening. That crystal ball stuff is really, it's just difficult for me personality-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when we were talking offline a few minutes ago, I'm like, we don't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
Even you look at where we were in June, I saw a joke the other day. It was SNL actually. And they're like, man, we did all that work and we got that week and a half where the pandemic was over and then we're back to it. Right. Like, we don't know. We can't predict anything. And so when you talk about these trends and these things that are happening, nobody knows. We're seeing a little slowdown in the housing market here.
Tiny.
And I think it's getting bigger by the day. And so we don't know any of these things and it's hard for us to predict.
I appreciate that honesty. As an example, if you remember the Brookings Institute's paper or article on Boise, before the pandemic, do you recall how often that was referenced or pulled up when we were talking about the
Might have been my fault.
the doom and gloom? Partially.
A little bit, yeah.
We've been blaming you secretly.
Yeah.
That's why you're here today. No, but all jokes aside, I don't talk about that stuff to many people anymore. The lack of infrastructure, the lack of talent. We seem to have been really enjoying this moment, and that's what it is to me. I think we're kind of in a moment, and there's greater historical context. And I say that because Don earlier pulled out his phone and he showed me a picture from a news Idaho Statesman from the 80s, 85. And they're blaming growth problems on Californians.
Yeah.
Back to your point about not knowing the history that you then learned from the CCDC movie, I didn't know that. So to me, this was like, this is a recent phenomenon. I've been here for 21 years. Right, but history sort of repeats itself. I think the pendulum is swinging. The pandemic sure played into our hands because we were kind of on our back foot trying to figure out our strategic next move, and we got lucky.
And so the Brookings Institute, for all of us have read that report and reviewed it, but that report was really, the crux of it was that Boise and this ecosystem is going to have a problem largely around talent.
Yep.
Was we're not producing enough high talented individuals to fill the coming job market.
House of Cards, I think, was used.
And then politicians not getting along was the other piece.
Right. Well, I find that one less interesting, but certainly,
for sure.
Not very newsy.
as someone who currently hires very talented people, the first part of that was very interesting.
So have you found that to be at all true? I personally think we still are underproducing talent. I still think, while the game, totally. Boise State and the, computer science and the areas where I'm particularly interested has definitely stepped up their game.
Night and day.
Yeah. It's definitely improved.
Better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just not where we really will need to be to compete. But then again, I go, I don't know if that even matters in a world where people can work remotely.
And for us specifically, we hire a lot of technologists, all right, at Vinyl. And I'd say if we look at the people who we've hired recently in just Boise, if you're talking about, I'd say it's about 50-50 on how many of those have been here for more than a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. A good portion of them have moved here recently, and we're kind of capturing some of that talent influx that's coming to Boise. And then, the other thing is, on the flip side of that, you're right. There isn't really a strong reason why I have to make that many hires in Boise, other than these feelings about investing in my ecosystem. But from just a pure business standpoint, there isn't even really a salary differential.
They can be attracted to here too, just like what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, listen, to get off that negative stuff, I think Boise has evolved in a way that it's evolved its own strengths.
Right.
Where that sort of make the Brookings thing irrelevant.
Let's talk about those things.
So, the first one that comes to my mind is accessibility. What I mean is, Tiam, before you took your role at Trailhead, I spent some time working at Trailhead. We had lunch, and it's like an instant connectedness that we're both open to that. Everybody in this room is that way. Like it's really easy to connect with people here in Boise, which allows people to, leverage each other's skills, talents, and networks in ways that just simply, I mean, listen, I've lived in the Bay Area. I grew up in the Portland area. I do not believe those two places have all that connectivity.
I lived in Seattle for a year, in the Bay for a year, and I felt like I was an alien.
Yeah.
I did not feel integrated in that community. And it's something that I'm trying to be really conscious about with people who come here is like, let's not be like that.
Exactly.
And I actually think a lot of people are like that here. Like, let's welcome them in. And it's the tech ecosystem. It's waving when you see people. One of my favorite things downtown is if you see somebody who's lost, so they're either not from here, they're visiting, is to stop and be like, hey, can I help you find that? And people are like,
I'm so
wait,
guilty
can I
of
help you? Wait, what you want me to, like, I did it a couple weeks ago, and they're like, I'm like, it's right there. And the husband's like, oh, can you show me? And the wife's like, wait, we've got it. We've got our phone. No, it's right there.
We don't have any change.
Right? And I think that's a very Boise thing.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, and I always say not that I sell Boise to anyone per se, but whenever I talk to people about Boise, and certainly when I travel, people are especially curious the last 24 months. I always say that one of the greatest things about Boise is I can send a random email to a random CEO and probably get a lunch meeting out of it. And they probably have no idea if I'm anybody worth meeting with. And the point of that is that people hear something that's special is this willingness to help, especially when you're talking about entrepreneurship or you're talking about technologists or things like that. I agree. I think
it just comes from a place of not having everything. And just like any adaptive system, you adapt to the challenges. You don't stay the same. You find your own specialized adaptation. And that's an example.
And I thought one point that Brookings piece made that's kind of interesting in this context is it was arguing that we were losing that magic that we had with Micron, HP, Orida, Simplot, Boise Cascade, all of Jeff's clients. And, and they were saying, we lost that magic and some of those companies have gone away. You know what made that all work? Those CEOs, they all talked. Now you're seeing this thing with like Vivek Sankaran at Albertsons has been leading this effort with some of the larger CEOs in town to start those conversations again. Those things matter because if the big guys are talking and they're having those conversations, it makes it easier for the little guys to start talking and not have that turfism or that territorialism. Well,
and I'll tell you, I mean, Entrepreneur Week in the grand scheme of things that you're talking about is a once a year event that happens, but we end up bumping up with a lot of those folks, kind of talking about what we're seeing on the ground as part of Boise. And you're right. I mean, they certainly talk with each other. They talk with each other about us. So we know that conversation is happening.
Everybody does.
Yeah. Mostly about Tiam.
Certainly about Tiam.
Why do you think I'm not saying anything, guys?
The point that I'm making, though, is that this willingness to invest in the ecosystem some of these companies are very blue blood. Some of them are not. I mean, look at Cradlepoint's growth and now exit, right? I know that we're all very proud of, how well that has gone. And certainly, we'll have talks that was part of Entrepreneur Week with them because of how exciting that event really is.
I talked to Todd Kramer today. He
right.
told me for a BEW event, and he told me they've added 400 employees.
Yep.
Wow.
Since they got bought.
Yeah.
And not all of them are here, but
a lot of them are.
I understand they're expanding office space. And so it's just because they exit, I think some people will see, it's an exit. Maybe they're going to disinvest. And people used to be, I remember when Albertsons crashed here in the early 2000s and everybody in town was like, And now I don't think we're quite as worried about that.
We're way more stable.
We're way more stable. And nobody's taking jobs out.
Remember
here.
the Micron layoffs and what it did to Columbia Village? I just remember, houses for sale, en masse driving down Columbia Village. That was a little blip in their stock price, really.
I mean, we can talk about the glory days of MK or whatever, but the truth is we're much more like, only word I have is anti-fragile, or we actually have the strength.
I don't know what that word is. So.
Well, and some of that
being like
there's some redundancy, right?
Redundancy. Yeah. We're not going to fail. We actually are stronger now because we are not so reliant on it's like a single point of failure. Right?
Well, and luckily, of course, Albertsons has come swimming,
totally
amazing,
screaming back.
It's a huge grocery hub, Winco.
I mean, what is it? It's
a huge fintech hub now too.
Well, and the other one to point out there too is, of course, Count's exit, and prior to that we had T-Sheets exit, and T-Sheets was always the one because Intuit has a playbook, right? And it seems like Intuit continued to invest here. In fact, building out and higher.
Yeah. But I just want to say, it's not just about exits, right? There are people building stuff that are, this environment that we talked about earlier allows people to have 1, 2, 7, 8, 20-person companies that are very successful, that contribute, build wealth in the community. And I don't mean that as a, knock on any of those great companies. I'm just saying that, I think one thing is the metrics we judge ourselves by are changing.
I think what you're pointing out is sort of, what it takes to plant those seeds. I think these exits are largely predicated on some of the work that's been done before.
Yeah.
And that work is predicated on what's been done before. I was told the story of how J.R. Simplot wrote the Micron brothers or the Parkinson brothers a check.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my aha moment. I go, okay, so you don't have to do it all on your own. You don't have to bootstrap. The thing that catalyzed our ecosystem and our universe of tech here in Boise was a handshake deal. And one realized that I need to invest in the other, potato chips to computer chips, in order to poach talent from them someday.
I think a lot of ecosystems that have been successful, and certainly ones that are bigger than us, have had that characteristic. So do we think that that's, so unique to Boise, it's a good explanation for our success of where we're sitting right now, or success is even a relative term as it is. But, do we think that is something that's so unique, is this willingness to kind of go and write some of those first checks? I know, Jeff, for instance, you do. I've been writing checks this last year too, investing in local Boise companies.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm the best one to answer that, just because I'm very focused on individuals. Right. I don't even really worry about building companies yet. I worry about helping founders do cool stuff. So I don't really have a good opinion on that question. So I'm going to pass it on.
No, I mean, I'm not writing anybody a check except for my employees. So I'm not in that rare air. But
yeah, it's quite glamorous.
Yeah, but I think that this is the question, right? This why Boise question, not just for this podcast, but this is the question throughout time. And there is no one thing. And I think that's ultimately the answer. Yeah. It's all the things we're talking about. It's early October. It's okay to say we taped this, right? Mm-hmm. And we're outside.
I'm wearing a t-shirt.
It's almost 10 o'clock at night, or Tiam's in a t-shirt. I'm stupidly wearing shorts because I'm getting cold. It's that. It's the fact that I can be on the river if I want to in the middle of the day. It's easy. The vision of the Boise River Greenbelt. I mean, look at what an amazing thing that is in our community.
It's such an investment too.
It's J.R. Simplot's discovering how to dehydrate potatoes. It's the Parkinson brothers figuring out how to make semiconductors better. It's all of these things that come together that brew into this little thing that are like, people get here, and we were just talking to somebody who left and came back and went, this is kind of a cool spot. Jeff used to live in Meridian. Now he lives in Boise because he's like, Boise's so cool. I mean, there's just something, there's an X factor about it that I don't think anybody's ever going to be able to articulate, because it's a lot of things.
So I have a question specifically for you, Jeff, and probably you as well, Tiam. So something that I always find myself being concerned about, especially in the context of Entrepreneur Week, if you go back 3, 4, 5 years when we first started putting this event on, and you were talking to investors and other ecosystems about looking at Boise, something that always came up as kind of a weird, glaring issue was the amount of worthy ideas and entrepreneurs to actually invest in. Are there enough ideas that are being generated to sustain an ecosystem to continue to have acceleration? How do we feel that's going? And do we think this extreme movement of people here, which is pretty drastic on the grand scheme of things, is that changing the ecosystem, or do we not know yet?
I think overall trajectory is going well, relatively speaking. So what did PitchBook say? In 2008, Boise-based startups raised $8 million, and then you fast forward to about 2016, and that went to 70 point something. So that's just one data point on the trajectory. I also can say, for Boise Entrepreneur Week, our pitch competition, we had 37 applicants, of which 28 were from Idaho. Mm-hmm. That number has been going up steadily every year. And the same goes for Trail Mix. So just on the metric side,
and to be clear, the first year we had a pitch competition, we had 11 applicants. We sold that really well, but there were only 11 applicants.
Yeah, right.
We'll see about that. And we did that with those 11. I think those 11 then turned into more later, back to the planting the seeds argument that I'm making. It's all about the historical context, like you said. But where we stand today is we sort of have a choice on who are the finalists, and we actually have to go through a screening process, which sounds silly that that's a good problem to have, but that's a great problem to have.
Well, and I asked this question I definitely want to hear your answer to it. I asked this question because more and more I'm getting this email, LinkedIn message, phone call, however they choose to bother me. People from not in the Boise ecosystem, especially institutional investors, trying to get a sense of what they should be paying attention to here, right? And I certainly have my go-to answers for that kind of stuff, but that question is getting asked more and more and more, and I'm not even sure why I'm the one.
Do you mean that they can't? They're having trouble sifting through it themselves? There's enough that they're having trouble sifting it through it.
It's probably that they're not willing to pay enough attention.
I
Truly,
think that's what it is. They're looking for
shortcuts. I'm a shortcut.
Yeah, I mean, subscribe to Boise Dev. That's
for
step
sure.
one. Yeah, step one. But a couple comments. In 2013, I tried to raise $500,000 locally, unsuccessfully. Went to the Bay Area, was able to raise. This week, I had a conversation with an entrepreneur that's very confident, has commitments for close to $1 million on a $3 million raise.
Here locally.
Okay.
Yes, that's changed.
And so I think the game. So this is complex, but the Boise has changed, fundraising has changed. There's a lot of money washing around right now.
5 years ago, you had to hop on a plane.
You had to hop on a plane. And the other thing, to Tiam's point, listen, Tiam knows this about me. I'm passionate about what I call baby entrepreneurs, which are people who haven't started something or just barely starting something and are just trying to take those initial steps. I think that's an area where Tiam and Trailhead is investing in that. And I think Venture College is doing some good work there. I think that has to be done, both in the academic setting, but probably more importantly in the business environment, meaning the T-sheets of the world's, there's now people a couple of the people who managed to make some cash out of the T-sheets deal, investing in startups or at least high-paid people.
Well, I mean, we'll see it out of Cradle Point too.
Cradle Point,
for sure.
And
Count for sure.
Vacasa, there's people where they grew up in that entrepreneurship. And listen, the truth is, Boise's had that, but we had that in a much more traditional sense in the J.R. Simplot mode, in the real estate development mode.
Albertsons,
yes. Now we're finally getting it in sort of the technology sector. And that's very exciting.
I mean, the logo being an acorn isn't a mistake, right? I mean, it's
that was intentional.
Right.
That's what that is.
Yeah. But
says the marketer.
We've got acorns shaken out of everything right now, and not only just in money.
Yes.
Like, we've had some companies with exits in the last 3-4 years that have had a crap ton of turnover, and it's frankly a good thing because those people are going into these new startups, these new things.
Absolutely.
And every startup I hear, I'm not going to say their names, will be like, oh, they used to work at blank, blank.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's good because we're starting to see those acorns fall and sprout new things.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll say that, I was shocked the other day. I went back and we, of course, by putting on Entrepreneur Week, we followed up with all the previous pitch competition winners. And now that we're going on 5-6 years, right? Like we've got a few of them. And I was shocked to learn that all of them are still in business, every single one. And I started tallying up how many of them got resources beyond just that non-dilutive check that we gave them for winning a pitch competition. And the truth is by winning, I mean, the community was able to wrap around them. They got resources from all over the place outside of just
again, planting seeds. All we did is we put a flashlight on them.
Right.
I mean, $25,000 isn't gonna develop their product.
No.
And something, there's a lot of people, I mean, hopefully they're watching this, but there are a lot of people operating outside the flashlight, and big companies. I mean, I think about VisitPay, who got bought by R1, which is a publicly traded company, and hardly any. It's a great company doing cool stuff and really investing in Boise. And I don't know, they haven't been a limelight-seeking company. So I think it's really important also to say, hey, listen, there's stuff happening everywhere, and the important thing, it's not about the glory and just pitch competitions. I think they're great, but it's also there's just a lot of people doing the work.
And I had some people at one of the companies that was acquired in the last few years say, yeah, they bought it for the company, that was great, but they bought the company for Boise.
Yeah.
Because they had an operation here, they had a building here, they
true.
had people here, and they knew that this was a place that they could bring talent.
Yeah.
And
totally
that
true.
was, to me, was like a light bulb. Like, oh,
So I want to pivot the conversation just a little bit, and kind of the elephant in the room here, which I think you can probably speak to the best on, is let's talk about the housing market.
Yeah.
Right. I think that I was just telling you guys a story ahead of time, just kind of my own story about the housing market and kind of how I've seen that changed. But the truth is 3 years ago, houses were a lot less than they are today.
Yeah.
And so how do you see that trend kind of? Does it matter? Is it affecting our growth? Is it affecting our ability to attract top talent? Like, how much has it really changed? I'm sure you have the data that I'm not recalling immediately.
I mean, I think there's a few things at play. One, we are starting to see a bit of a softening. Where that goes, we don't know. Two, it's not housing prices for people like Nick that are the issue.
Right.
It's the housing prices for the people who are working in restaurants, who might have the night shift at Fred Meyer.
Or we just had Tree Fort this last couple weeks.
The artists and creators. Somebody made a good point to me a while ago, which is we have all these people moving here who are working for companies that are not here. Their economic security comes from somewhere else, which means they are consumers in our economy, but they're not producers in our economy. That concerns me a little bit, because if you're making a California wage and you're coming to Idaho, you might be spending at a California wage. That's good, right? But you're not actually like putting anything into the product here. You're not building a company. You're not maybe
so the
investing in
grocery store
companies.
and the restaurant and the mall and the places you go shop are going to
Yeah.
see a benefit.
And
It's all
so,
consumer
But you're not
spending
necessarily
stuff, yeah.
creating, new
you're
and
not
interesting
you're
jobs.
not doing
Yeah.
something, right? Like I own Boise Dev. I create news in this economy. I employ 5 people here, right? If you come in from California, you work for a company in California, you're not actually doing anything
Right.
to. The way that plays into housing prices is people get stuck. I think when we talk about housing prices, they get stuck on the price of houses. It's the cost of renting an apartment that's really becoming the major challenge right now. Because, a small 1-bedroom close to downtown that was built 40 years ago is $1,200.
And that same apartment was what, $650?
Yeah, maybe 400
Yeah.
even 10 years ago. That threatens a lot of things. That causes major challenges.
So you're saying it's not the house prices, it's a trickle down effect.
Oh,
from
it
that
is the
to
house
to
prices.
the-
It is the house prices.
It's the rent that
I think what people miss is the apartment rent. And you're seeing all these apartments go up all over town. Investors are rushing in. I don't like the crystal ball, but I have some concern that we're going to see some moderation in prices of single family homes, but not in apartment rent. And that can tear at the fabric real quick. And for people who spend any time in the Bay or in Seattle or in some of those high priced markets, it's the thing that I think is the biggest problem. You see, that's what our local leaders they're all focused on it.
Right.
That's because they
Well,
know that
and-
this is a
and-
major flashing warning light.
There's a lot of kind of demographics who feel the squeeze of that kind of
Yeah.
price change. But, one that you have to be very concerned about is people who are just getting their start in life. Because if it's not feasible
Right.
to stay and contribute to this city, whether you're just going into college or just graduating from college or maybe in a different stage, whatever, if it's not feasible for you to stay in the city, it really will hurt your future trajectory, right? Because then you become so dependent upon this importing of talent as opposed to your homegrown talent.
And we talk about talent, and we so often think about who's going to work at Count. I think who's going to work at Goldie's? Who's going to work at Albertsons? Where are they going to live? Are they going to have to live south of Cuna and drive in, which is going to exacerbate all those pollution problems and traffic problems?
To be clear,
It's tricky.
I don't think, I don't worry too much about who's going to work at Vinyl or who's going to work at Count, because for the most part, most of the tech companies here, to a certain extent, have normalized salaries in order to attract top talent.
Yeah.
Right? That's we adjusted very fast to that because that's what you had to do in the tech sector. But you're right; it's the rest of it. That's where there is a big concern because I don't have a good answer.
And teachers who, my
Certainly.
kid goes to Boise High and they have teachers commuting from, far away. And the teachers who do live, like my neighbor, she was able to buy a house from a a family member in order to stay in the neighborhood near Boise High. And the point being, this is sort of an unhealthy place that you have, because now you're going to lose talent out of teaching, which pulls down the quality of the education, which makes it has real risks that trickle through the whole economy, not just entrepreneurship, if that makes sense.
Pendulum is definitely swinging. To your comment and back to your comment, I remember in 2015 in grad school we did a project. Boise is declining. Reminded me a lot of that CCD movie where John Brunel starts off with
seems like
a
we've
letter.
always been declining in growth, right?
Well, he starts off with a letter from his dad or his grandfather, I think, on how the Boise Mall and everything is just falling apart. And I had this doom and gloom moment in grad school. I go, why is everybody talking about the demise of Boise? This is such a great place. But the gist was, look, we have this quality of life. A lot of the things that you talked about earlier, access to nature. You can be on the river. Healthcare was pretty affordable then. And the problem statement was, we're generating a bunch of service jobs for lower paid people. And we're attracting a bunch of those to serve all the old people that are moving here. And we're not doing enough on the tech side. And that was 6 years ago. That was not that
How
long.
much of this is a national problem? I mean, obviously, maybe Milwaukee or something, the houses are cheaper, but the taxes are higher. But they generally have the same challenges, right?
Certainly housing, and again, Don probably has better statistics than I do. I mean, everything that I've seen is the housing is following a similar trend that Boise's going through somewhat nationally across secondary and tertiary markets.
Completely.
I think there are areas in the Mountain West that are feeling that maybe a little more acutely just because of our proximity.
And the acuteness, the suddenness of it all.
The suddenness is very quick, right? Yeah. And in a town like Boise that is a tertiary market, an influx of 40,000 people, you feel that, right? You don't feel that if you live in LA or Seattle or wherever.
The suddenness is real. So I was sitting at the BEW annual conference. We talked about this earlier, and my mind was blown by how many commercial buildings, distribution centers are going up.
A lot of industrial.
Out west, it's really mind blowing, and on the speed of that.
But you know something? Have you flown over there? I mean, there is a lot of land still to go. Yeah. You go whatever that would west of 10 Mile.
There's a lot of parking lots in downtown that can still house buildings.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
Totally true. We think about, God, look how far we've come and how great it is. And it's like,
that's totally true.
We still are a
lot of
market.
resource that can still be utilized as we grow. And I thought you made a fantastic point about the 1980s. Now you see a lot of focus on, we got to figure out how to have good paying jobs that aren't white collar, good paying blue collar jobs, industrial, those types of things in Boise, in Caldwell, because if we don't have that mix, it's always that mix, we're going to be in trouble. If we become all retirees or all people who work for Google and live in California or live in Boise,
all tech workers,
we're all tech workers, it's not going to work.
Lord,
we have to have that.
We need
mix.
each other, yeah.
And I just think it's really important to say, like, who would we model ourselves after? I mean, the truth is, Boise has done a heck of a job. Like the leadership, the planning, all this, all the people that came well before we were engaged in this business community have really done a great job. I mean, I can't think of any place I'd rather be. And it really comes down to that, like.
Well, and I think we've talked about a lot of these issues almost as worries that we have. And I think to some extent, what we're really talking about is there's been a lot of change, and we're almost projecting fear of the future.
Exactly.
In almost everything we talked about. The truth is it is a great place to live. We all still live here. I'm not planning on moving anywhere else. I know you're not. I know you're not. I know you're not. Right? Like certainly the fabric of what's going on here is very positive. We've seen great strides in entrepreneurship and investment in the community. And so like all this stuff has come to a head to maybe be the reason why we saw so much growth during the pandemic, as a lot of markets did also see. And so as it just kind of struck me, it was interesting that maybe the reason why Boise's having so much of this is because people like us continue to worry about what happens tomorrow.
Yeah, and trying to protect it.
And have forever. Right?
And have forever. Like there has always been a cohort of people working in this community who are very concerned about how tomorrow looks in this town.
Look, I stand on the shoulder of giants. Right? The
all
city gave birth to Trailhead.
We all do.
And that time and place in 2015, you measure the impact. I'm not saying just Trailhead, but people like us working on this stuff together, shoulder to shoulder, and we're bearing the fruits today. Folks, you heard it here. Why Boise? Because we're shedding acorns.
So with that, I know we could probably have this conversation for hours, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to work with us and talk with us about what's going on with Boise. Boise is such an interesting and unique ecosystem that continues to grow. So thanks so much for talking with us.